Well, hello, welcome back. It's been a while, but yeah, as I promised, I'm finally getting back into some DOS stuff, albeit a very late game in DOS era terms, with a release year of 1996. Also, I'm switching the capturing style to use a CRT filter and a little bit of dimming on the picture of the capture to try to tone down a little bit of the shrieking colors that you might get when you look at it when you make a capture of straight capture of the pixels. So give it a more natural look of what it actually looks like on a CRT. If you like it or not, let me know by leaving a comment, if you will. But I think this is better. But yeah, back to the topic of today. So this is a brief look into a very little known action RPG with a very innovative 3D world for the time. It was designed by none other than former English teacher turned programming star, a real star of the British programming scene and home computer scene, Mike Singleton. He's a prolific legend from the British homebrew game scene, most famous for the 80s hit Lords of Midnight for the ZX Spectrum. That was kind of a proto Mountain Blade of sorts, if you like, and highly. He also made a highly technically impressive Midwinter for the Amiga and other platforms that played almost like a prototype of like a modern day Ubisoft open world game or something like that, but very, very early. So Ring Cycle, this game that we're looking at today, bears the lineage of these past efforts being quite obtuse and hard to grasp. It's filled with sometimes jarring features and very little instructions for the player, whilst being powered by some very clever coding work. The game is based on Wagner's old opera of the same denomination, and during the game you can meet some of the characters from the opera. Unlike Cryo's later effort to use this opera as a source material, uh, they did that later on with the adventure game The Ring. But this game takes a more grounded approach, closer to the world portrayed in Wagner's works. And you play as Sigmund and are given the seemingly simple quest of tracking down 10 important artifacts. So these are spread out across the large game world, and you must ask the locals, read rune stones, and navigate underground mazes to arrive at their locations. The game is very much about exploring the sprawling yet confusing game world and trying to make any sense of what sparse information you're given, what it's trying to convey. You will visit lots of different biomes, such as marshlands and forests and open plains, mountain regions, on this quest for the 10 artifacts. And all of these biomes are very distinct. So, along his quest, Sigmund can also encounter enemies such as roadside robbers, or in the case of entering a house, every single house is seemingly haunted by monsters, undead ghosts, other monstrous beings. And the way you fight these enemies is very simplistic. You have one spell, which is the fireball spell. This is your only weapon against a dangerous head. So by collecting ammo for this spell, called ammo, you can then fire little balls of flames, kind of like a machine gun, make short work of all the enemies that you encounter. These enemies in turn drop either more ammo for your spell or mead, which you can drink to regain health. So, see how this works? Yeah, the combat is very bare bones, with just a single weapon, simple pick up health system. It's like a simplistic Doom with fireballs. So you go around the world, you meet characters, and you pew pew all the enemies you encounter, and you look for the 10 artifacts in this fantasy Wagnerian game of treasure hunt. Now, the critics did not like this one back in the day, and they completely dismissed the simplistic combat system and all the weird disjointed game mechanics, like when entering a small cottage, you suddenly find yourself inside a maze-like dungeon the size of a football field, populated with 40 undead enemies for some reason. And there is merit to this criticism. The game is super confusing, it lacks any sort of cohesive plotline, it has very simplistic mechanics, and probably a mouse control system straight from hell. But personally, I feel that this is sort of as intended. Like, if you look at Singleton's other games, they all exhibit this vision of a large open world where the player character can explore. So I feel that this game is just that vision taken to its extreme. Exploration is key. It's like a Norse myth version of being on the hunt for Easter eggs out in the yard as a kid, and that holds its own fun and merit in a way. And of course, the star of the show, which even the most harsh critics of today did in fact acknowledge, is the technical showcase that this game was at the time. It has a massive world, not the size of Bethesda's Daggerfall, but still massive. It's populated with scenery, characters, roaming bands of robbers, wildlife, lots of varying biomes to see. It even has a day and night cycle as well as weather that changes depending on location and climate. So snow is prevalent in the mountains and rain is common on the open plains, for example. This world also exhibits a realistic sense of height, where you can go into deep valleys and you can climb high hills to look out across the landscape below, which was very uncommon for the time. The world is like mysterious, it's dreamlike and strange, yet remains believable, and it's the true centerpiece of this game. The game engine driving this open world is a tweaked version of the game engine from Lords of Midnight 3, developed by Singleton and additional programmer David Gautry. It's a very early voxel-based engine, like the ones used in Novologic's games, more famous games like Armored Fist and Comanche, and eventually several years later in Delta Force, for example. The reason for choosing a voxel-based approach was initially inspired by Novologic's efforts and the kind of naturally rolling hills and realistic landscapes that such an approach can produce. Unlike the Lords of Midnight 3 version of the engine, the one used in Ring Cycle runs in full screen as opposed to rendering in a small window in the middle of the large HUD, as was the case in Lords of Midnight 3. And it also has a higher detail level and a greater fidelity for the voxel maps. It can also play CD audio independent of the regular game loop, and this is a feature that is key to Ring Cycle, as the game plays custom renditions of Wagner's classic opera pieces in the background continuously as you play the game. The game engine can also do some pretty advanced culling of unseen voxels to increase performance, and objects such as houses and scenery are also voxel based, unlike in many early voxel engines where the world is constructed of voxels but the objects in it are simple flat sprites. The engine impresses with its speed on contemporary hardware. What you see here is the capture of the game running on a Pentium Overdrive 83 MHz processor on an SIS 370 motherboard. So it's a 486 motherboard with a Pentium Overdrive at 83 MHz. And this is impressive, especially being full screen. It does, however, share the common trait of most voxel engines in that it's very CPU bound and also highly speed sensitive, so that if you have a faster CPU, it will run at an unplayable frame rate. This is not an issue today with all sorts of emulation options and stuff like that. If you don't own suitable hardware, still want to play it. But it was an issue if you wanted to replay the game back in the later 90s because of CPU speeds evolving, so the game While it would run on your new Pentium 2 400 MHz, it would play at an uncontrollable speed. As for the gameplay, like I said, it's very simple. I feel like it's somewhat like Lords of Midnight 3, which was equally dismissed by critics, but it's an impressive game engine in search of a game, I would say. It's experimental and you can see where it's meant to evolve, but unlike, say, Midwinter, the impressive world generation tech doesn't really come with much of a game attached to it. It's like a treasure hunt used to showcase a very impressive game engine. That said, it has a very interesting atmosphere and it is fun to go around the world and take in the sights while immersing yourself in the Wagner music playing in the background. Kind of how today's walking simulator genre favors mood and world design over gameplay elements. Mike Singleton went on to work on some other titles, including Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb and Grid, racing game. He passed away in 2012, sadly. He is still remembered as a true British home computing pioneer. Now, Ring Cycle, however, is mostly forgotten, with much more focus being given to his other games like Lords of Midnight and Star-Lord. And yeah, it's more of a tech demo than a fully thought out game. But still, it has a certain atmosphere to it that is hard to deny, and the world is greatly realized and instills a sense of mystery. And the use of clever voxel tech and CD audio also made for an audiovisual feast at the time. If you really wanted to showcase your powerful CPU and CD-ROM drive and stuff at the time, multimedia system, this was the game to do it. If you want to play today, you will need an original copy. There is no digital storefront that sells this game, and the rights to it are not really clear in terms of who actually owns the rights to the game. But if you can find a copy, you will need a Pentium system, preferably a Pentium 120 MHz or so to get the full experience. Be aware though that you don't want to go above something like 200 MHz due to the speed sensitive game engine, because that would cause the game to be unplayably fast in certain situations. All in all, it's an interesting game that was a technological masterpiece for a short while before the whole 3D accelerator hype got going and polygons could be used also for expansive worlds, with the exception of Nova Logic, of course, still betting on the voxel approach. Still a bit sad that that didn't catch on more, apart from Outcast perhaps. It's playable though, even today, if you go into it with an open mindset and an understanding of what it is, and especially what it's not. So thank you for tuning in to this video, and I'll be back soon with another one.